Welcome to Data Mesh Book Club. This is episode 3 of the Fundamentals of Data and Engineering book. This is the last episode, Andy, that we're going to have to talk about this great book. But a special treat today, and as you'll see in a couple of slides, we've got somebody joining us that I think will make the conversation extra special. So let's go on real quick to the next slide before we jump into the details. So before Andy, Mott, and I jump into the conversation, I do want to invite everyone to join us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn offers us the opportunity to engage with you, have a conversation, kind of build a community, so to speak, in this book club to share more. So we can learn not just about the books, but really learn more about what each of us are actually doing in our professional careers. So to join the book club, you can either just scan the QR code, or you can go to LinkedIn and kind of do a search for us. All righty, Andy. Let's go to the next slide. Let's get ready. So today, our special guest will be Joe Reis himself. Joe Reis will join us at about the halfway point. And so Andy and I will kind of cover chapter 10 and chapter 11 at a high level. We hope that we get far enough into chapter 11 so that when Joe Reis joins, he can give us his own perspective on the future of engineering. Awesome. Let's get started right away with chapter 10, security and privacy. Now, my first impression, Andy, having read the kind of first 2 parts of the book, right? Those first 2 parts are this big, right? A lot of great content. You and I have already spoken about the things we love and some of the things we might have missed kind of in the first 2 parts. That last chapter, security and privacy and data engineering, is like this thin. I think he might have been rushed at the end. We'll ask Joe when he joins to see what he thinks he might have missed from those chapters. But security and privacy is probably about 10 pages, I think, something in that kind of in that range. There's a lot to talk about there, certainly more than 10 pages, but I certainly appreciate the need to kind of summarize this. What was your take on that last section, Andy?
So So to be honest, if I was reading this book, and if I was, I think I suggested on the last call, on the last one of these that we did, that I think that this is required reading for kind of people that are coming out of university and want to get into the, into the data space, whether it's data engineering or one of the kind of other disciplines. I kind of think that the security and privacy section feels a little bit rushed, as you said. It's worth reading, I guess, once, but I don't think you're going to take away a lot. And maybe I'll mention this to Joe later on. Maybe it's an idea for his next book. But clearly, there's not much on data modeling in the data engineering book, and I think that's by design. I think we can talk to Joe about that. One of the aspects of when we think about data modeling, or certainly I do, is kind of security and things like security rules, authorizations. Who can see what sort of data? Who can see what sort of data when you bring different kind of attributes together? And none of that is really covered. Right? It's the long and the short of it. There are some principles. There's things like getting people into good sort of habits and routines. Things like backing up your data. Things like patching systems, logging interactions with systems. But to me, it's kind of the more like the operations security. It's things you need to do just to keep a base level of security. So if I was to skip a part of the book, this would be the section I would skip. It's 10 pages, and it's just not. It's just terrible. I don't think you walk away with a lot. Is my opinion. I'll maybe bring this up with Joe later on and see if he's going to plan to do something a bit more.
I wasn't expecting that. I couldn't disagree more. Look, there's a lot to, certainly 10 pages isn't a lot, but I think when we think about security and privacy in respect to data engineers, you said it right when you started. You said, I think for somebody learning the topic, learning the subject is great, maybe a great segue or a great summary, but this is a really important chapter. I think there's a transition now, in my opinion, in the way that we used to engineer for security, right? So we've been engineering everything, designing everything, since, I was a hacker before I ever started doing data back in the late 90s when, TFTP, Etsy password got me into any Unix system. The security has been important for a long time, and everything we've been doing for a long time is engineered for security, engineered for privacy, engineered for compliance. I think the shift right now on the data side is there's an incredible demand to open up data. There's an incredible urgency, a competitive urgency for companies to find ways to share more data. And so in an area or in a world, in a economy where sharing data is a competitive differentiator, the way that we engineer is going to be very, very important. And it doesn't mean that we put every control that we can think of in place. That's the way we used to engineer security. I think we have to be very smart about the access models. We have to be very smart and trusting about how we classify data, right? So if we classify data correctly, we can build the right access models. But also even more so, I think when we engineer for security, these aren't static engineering decisions that we're making anymore. These are going to be dynamic engineering decisions. I engineer access to data based on dynamic attributes. Who are you? Where are you? What you're using? What you're going to do with the data? And so I can go on and on. If I were writing this part of the book, I would write a whole another 100 pages or 400 pages on it. But I think maybe this ties into the future of engineering in the next section, but there's a lot to dig into on the security and privacy side. And you can be the best engineer in the world. If you haven't figured out the security part, you're not going to be successful, right? And it doesn't mean more security. It means the right level of security at the right place at the right time. So there's my impassioned speech for security.
So I agree with all of you said, just none of that is in the book. And that's my problem.
Okay.
So that's why, I kind of, if we got into ABAC and RBAC, if we talked about, the things you talked about, the democratization, the dynamic security controls, designing for security in a world where data is kind of, everywhere and we want to democratize it. If we talked about things like GDPR and ownership of data and the privacy impacts that has, that would be cool. It's just not here. So, so let's,
let's put that on the Joe list. Joe, can we help you write the next book? Data engineering securely. Data
Yeah,
security
or
engineering.
maybe we could give some suggestions on how the second edition could be useful.
There you go. There you go.
So,
Chapter 2, volume 2. Awesome. Well, this gets
let's
us
move on.
perfectly into the
Yeah,
fun
sorry.
chapter, right? The one that we've all been looking forward to, which is the future of data engineering. And I think, to be fair, there were parts of the book early on that they already started to hint about. I mean, chapter 1 or section 1 and section 2 certainly weren't. There was a lot of history there, but there was also a lot of modern data engineering there. And so I think when we talk about the future, I don't know how. I mean, you and I could sit here and imagine 10 years and 5 years. It's almost impossible to imagine where this is going. I mean, what are your takes on some of the comments that Joe made here in the future of data engineering?
So, so I guess there's two high-level things, and then we can dive into the concept of the data engineering lifecycle not going away. So that this is one of the statements that he makes, and I agree with that. Right? Fundamentally, we're always going to have to get data from some things, some places. We're going to have to do some stuff with it so that we can make it available to some people. Now, that process may be, as it is today, sort of fairly manual in places. In the not too distant future, we'll just be chatting to OpenAI widgets, and they'll be doing all this for us. But the data engineer will inevitably still be there, might have a different job title or whatever, but adding value, bringing context and adding value to the automation that we're inevitably going to see, in the not too distant future with, the rise of things like ChatGPT. The skills may change, but that process, that life cycle, I think is going to hang around. The other point that I think I quite enjoyed reading was moving beyond the modern data stack. This idea that we have basically been doing the same stuff in terms of a data stack for 30 or 40 years, right? In the past, it was ODSs, and we were using things like I guess Talend and Oracle and other ETL tools, and sticking things in Teradata or Oracle, and we're using business objects. And if you look today, we've got Salesforce and other systems, and they're feeding in through Matillion or I don't know, Fivetran into Snowflake, and now we've got Tableau and Looker on top, right? It's the same stuff. It's the same process. It's the same stack. It's just got different shiny things inside it. And I guess we need to move beyond that, right? And what moving beyond that looks like is an interesting question, but inevitably we're going to move beyond that kind of approach, that layered approach. And it may be that, as Joe suggests, and Joe and Matt, that actually we move to much more like a streaming, where there's kind of just a stream of data from top to bottom or left to right. It may be that, or it may be something else. But I do think, the time is long past, actually, for us to move past what we now call the modern data stack, which I suggest is kind of the antiquated data stack, just with shiny widgets on it. But yeah, so they're the two things that I would kind of pull out. Yes.
Yeah, I love your comments there on the data stack. I'm not a data engineer, and so it's hard for me to kind of really comment on the details, so to speak. But what you're talking about makes a lot of sense. What I would like to comment on, if I think about it from a kind of a higher level perspective, the outside looking in of a data engineer, I feel like the who will change. What do I mean by that? I think today, if you want to be a data engineer, feels like you need 2 PhDs, right? Maybe that's not true anymore. Maybe you can only get by with one, but certainly it requires a really, really specific set of skill sets, specialized knowledge to be an effective data engineer. I think that changes. It doesn't mean that there won't be advanced engineers that still require those specialized skill sets, but I think more and more, I hope that we start to see the engineering capabilities kind of being performed by business analysts or data analysts, where people have that self-service ability to do more on their own. So I think the who changes. I hope it does anyway, because I think that's the only way we're going to keep up with all this data demand. The what, in terms of what the engineer does, I think it's going to, I also think that's going to change. And I think if we can allow some of the more advanced engineering resources to focus on the advanced capabilities, dare I say, the further evolution and adoption of AI, things of that nature, and we can enable business teams to take care of some of the other engineering activities in a self-service manner. I think the what they're doing, I think is going to be really impressive, and it's going to be less on dashboards, less on applications, and more on the advanced analytics side. The how, I don't know, right? I would love to, how they're going to do that in terms of what tools they're going to use. What's interesting to me, and I'm going to quote Joe, he's not on the call yet, so I deny he ever said this, but I heard Joe say this at a conference. And if we think about the how, right? I don't think it's coding, right? Joe made a comment. He said, if you're looking for a sustainable career, don't go learn programming. He says, go be a plumber. He says, because we're always going to need plumbers, we're going to need electricians. He's like, but coders, he's like, that all what we replace with an AI engine. He kind of said it with a smirk, kind of, tongue in cheek, trying to be provocative. But I think there's some truth in that. I think less and less, I think we will use AI to do engineering. I think we'll need AI to promote engineering. And I think we'll need that enabled business analysts, that enabled data analysts to adopt some of that, the AI-driven engineering. So I think that's going to have a big play in it. I'm not just saying, I know AI is a big buzzword right now, but I'm just kind of thinking about how that's going to play out and who in the company is going to be accountable for driving that out. Data scientists and data engineers working together, I think. So I don't know, maybe that's too far-fetched, Andy. What would you say?
So in some ways I agree. I don't know the how. I'll be honest, but so a while ago I was interviewed by a journalist for some article, and during the interview process I was obviously spouting on like I normally do, and he summarized back to me and he said, what you seem to be describing is a citizen data engineer. And I thought, do you know what? He's right.
Yeah.
And I think what you just said is kind of correlates with that, right? This idea that actually we don't necessarily all need to be programmers to get value from data. We may have much simpler to use interfaces which are doing the coding or the programming for us. And therefore, the number of people that are actually manipulating and dealing with data, I guess, kind of gets much larger, much more quickly without having to have those kind of specialized kind of skill sets. So I think that's, I think I agree with you actually, yeah. That's going to make a difference. That's going to be the future, that we end up with, lots of people doing this. I think when we think about data mesh as well, I think sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, with data mesh, I think when we think about data products, right, there's a data engineering life cycle, getting data from maybe source line data products, and producing and creating those consumer aligned data products, for example. There's an engineering life cycle in there. As we push out the responsibility for doing that to business units, to domains, we're going to need more and more people. We're not going to have the skills, there just won't be enough people to meet those across all the business domains. Those folks in the domains will know their domains better than anyone else. They'll know marketing and finance. And so by giving them tools that do automatic generation of code or whether it's AI or something else, I think that that very much is kind of the future, where people can use the context that they understand of a business problem without having to have that cognitive understanding of the technology and or kind of I guess maybe even the data, that they just have the ability of asking new and interesting and valuable questions, and letting the technology sort of help answer them. Maybe that's too far ahead.
No, it's what we do, right? It's the nice thing about being in this position is being able to kind of sit back and imagine the future, so to speak. I wonder how many fifth graders are going to read the data engineering book, right? Probably not many, right? But the interesting thing about having written, and Joe texted me a second ago, hopefully he's going to join us in a second. What's interesting about this book being written, I think, is it does open the doors for more people who are curious to maybe be motivated to enter the world of data engineering, right? And so I think we talked about the who said, I think you're going to have new personas filling the role. We talked a little bit about the what, thinking that the there you'll have advanced engineers focused on advanced topics. And I love your idea of a citizen data engineer focused on some of the more self-service type of capabilities. But the volume, I think, will also change. You'll have, hopefully, not that this book is going to revolutionize engineering and turn every engineer into data engineer, but certainly I think it provides a good foundation for people that are curious to just say, you know what, I think I really want to do that. You know what, I think I know where to get started. You know what, I think I got a lot of these skill sets already. And so hopefully more and more people kind of get that from the book. I know I certainly did. From that perspective, it's extremely valuable. And there he is. Joe has joined us. And so, Joe, you missed a amazing conversation. Well, maybe not quite amazing, but a rich conversation Andy and I just had about the last two chapters in the book, security, privacy, and the future of data engineering. And Andy and I each gave our opinions on where we thought data engineering was going. You've covered quite a bit, or covered maybe not quite a bit, but you've covered a good summary. You've provided a good summary in the last chapter. Tell us a bit about your view, right? And maybe has anything changed since you wrote that last chapter? What's your view? Let's talk about future of engineering. I think just a quick summary. I think that the who does engineering is going to change, because I think your book is going to open the door for a lot more people to come into the field of data engineering. And I think the how is going to change. What do you think?
I generally still agree with I think the general direction of that last chapter, kind of the future of data engineering. I think that a lot of the trends are still secular, right? So things will be done faster. I think the feedback loop between applications and data and that whole life cycle will continue to shorten. I don't see anything getting in that way. The big things that have happened since the book was published, and this was kind of ongoing while we were writing it, was sort of the interest rates are rising, so that obviously I think is causing some disruptions, in some good ways, I would say as well, but with how data teams are functioning. So,
Mm-hmm.
just you're having to do more with less, and probably do it better and more efficiently. And so that hasn't really gone away. We don't sort of hinted at that in the book, but I think that's the big thing that's been in 2023. The other big advance was just generative AI. I mean, ChatGPT, when that came out, I mean, that kind of blew the door off of everything. AI kind of had its iPhone moment all of a sudden, and I
So
think
did
we're
you
still.
use any ChatGPT in the writing of this book?
We didn't. No generative AI in the book.
I was joking.
It would be hard if we were to write it that way. I've been experimenting with it with some new content and stuff, and it is interesting. I think that it's just the inevitability of its impact on, I think, both content and even coding, right? Like, I know a lot of engineers now that are using Copilot and ChatGPT to write code, and so I just think that that's only going to accelerate. And what that means for engineers is, I think a lot of the rote work is just going to continue to be abstracted. But we also talk about this in the book, where we feel like the role of an engineer and the role of people in data really is just going to keep moving up higher up in the value chain.
Oh
And
yeah.
so if you're engineering systems, perhaps it's using more kind of off the shelf, or now AI generated code. I mean, that was I think the big thing that changed. I don't see that going away. So
So, given this is a data mesh book club, right? And we, in the first couple of chapters, when we were looking at them, we were applying the data mesh lens, I guess, to much of the kind of content. When I think about the data engineering lifecycle, I think that still hangs around, right? That's just about data products now. The end point is a data product of the lifecycle, arguably. And with Chat GPT or the generative AI, it feels like that enables people with less technology skills, maybe even less knowledge of data, to be able to kind of ask questions, answer those questions in the form of a product, and kind of get through that life cycle.
yeah,
And so, to me, it feels like generative AI is actually just kind of come from left field, but actually makes the paradigm of data mesh more, I guess, just more realistic, right? When I think about that engineering lifecycle as kind of the third wheel in the nebulous cloud that is my brain that's putting these things together. I mean, does that kind of make sense? Are you kind of thinking along similar lines, or is there something massively missing in that bringing those three things together?
I think it's an interesting idea, and I think generative AI just makes the interface between question and answer is a lot shorter, right? And
Hmm.
so I don't think the data engineering lifecycle goes away per se. I mean,
No.
I can't think of situations where you like, don't ingest data or don't store it or process it and so forth. But
Hmm.
it's one of these things where I yeah, I mean, it's something I'd love to talk to Shamak about too, just to get her opinion on kind of where that is. 'Cause I do feel like it definitely makes things a lot simpler than it used to, right? So I mean, the way she describes data mesh in the book is, a lot of data products are accessible through APIs and
Hmm.
that sort of thing. You know, I I don't think that goes away, but the door's open now for I guess any question you want. I mean, I was helping my kids last night, and I was using ChatGPT and I was like, can it solve a word problem? And I was like, holy cow, it actually did, right? And so did
Hmm.
Bard. It did the same thing. And I have a math background, so I solved it, and I was like, it did a very good job at this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, my kids were blown away. Then the next question was, well, what kind of career path you go down when you're older, which we can talk about later. But it was just, it's definitely one of those like moments where the light bulb went off. So as far as data mesh goes, I mean, I honestly don't really know. I haven't really thought of too much about the impact of generative AI, but I think it will speed up.
Hmm.
That is so.
Yeah, it
So
feels like it will. It
the
feels.
problem, especially when you can have generative AI, I think you have a foundation model crawl your metadata in your business, right? I think that's going to open up a lot of opportunities to
Mhm.
answer questions within your business. So.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the key, though. I think there's this. I had somebody ask me just a couple hours ago in a meeting. We were talking about using something like ChatGPT or an AI engine to, hey, so when I get my data now, I just want to speak to something and then have that something go find my data. Can we do that? It's like, yeah. What it's done, I think, is that it gives people the impression that all this stuff on the back end is easy now. Oh, we don't need engineers anymore. Just put an
Mhm.
AI agent in front of it. It'll find the data for you. It'll model it for you. It'll structure it for you. It'll fix all the metadata. No, no, you have to have all that stuff first, right? You still have, the governance
Mhm.
arguably is even more important. The metadata is more important. Without a doubt, we can use I think, to help us solve some of those issues, but you need to engineer it to solve the problem you're chasing, and then you need to engineer it to integrate end to end. So I don't know if this new AI push makes engineering easier in the short term. Probably makes it harder in the short term, and maybe in the longer term, when maybe you don't have to code anymore, right? Raise your kids to be plumbers, not coders, as you say, Joe. Um, yeah, but I think in the short term it gets a lot harder.
It very well could, and especially I think there's a few factors, right? So regulation. I mean, the Biden administration
Yeah,
just announced that they're going to be looking at regulation for AI, I think today, and so who knows what that is? But I mean, imagine the complications that happened because of GDPR
yeah,
1.0, right? That changed a lot of things, and GDPR 2.0 is, I think a lot of that's about AI regulation, and now the states, the United States is going to go down that path too. So, what that means is it just means that there's going to be more complexity with the engineering at the end of the day. I mean, GDPR didn't make lives easier for engineers. I can say that, you know.
Yes.
right.
I think it
And
benefits companies like Starburst, for example, where it's like, you don't want to store the data anywhere. You just want to access it and query it. But I don't want to have the liability of centralizing it in that case, right? So, but
I
AI,
do
the
notice I have to
answers
call.
do. Oh, so go. What were you saying?
No, I have to call out the tension in the room, and I've noticed it, and I can't stand it anymore. The tension between you and Andy. I just realized you guys haven't seen each other since the big fight. And for those of you that didn't watch it live, you can go on LinkedIn and watch Data Nova. Have you guys come to terms? Have you guys forgiven each other for that event?
No.
No, man, I'm just kidding. No. Andy's cool. It's fine. It's all good. He's
Joe's
far
And
enough.
Andy
okay.
conceded.
Joe's
Andy
okay.
conceded you won. Andy conceded you won. I think, right, Andy? Didn't you?
If you say so, Adrian. That's what
Or
Adrian
maybe
told me
not.
to say. Apparently, we have to be nice to the guests. So that's apparently Joe. Yeah, you're awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's gonna go burn my book after this, so it's fine. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
It's
Well, look,
that was a fun debate. Yeah, it was a fun debate. You know, I think that the essence of that debate really was, you know, sort of data engineering in the lens of data mesh, right? So I think that that's still I think an open-ended question. I mean, obviously we argued both sides of that argument, and you know, I'm very curious to
yeah.
see how it goes. But you know, as we pointed
Well,
out in the
we're
last chapter,
excited.
titles change. We pointed that out in the last chapter too. It's like the only constant thing in this world is that, you know, titles and responsibilities morph, and you know, the title of data engineer could very well go away at some point. That's entirely possible. That's wouldn't be the first time that happened. In fact, I'd be shocked if it's around, you know, and you know, as a title in 20 years. But you never know. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Well, maybe in closing, I'll just summarize some of my favorite parts or my big takeaways from the book. One is I'll reiterate what I said a second ago was, and Andy, I'll let you close, but I, I do think that it was missing, right? So there wasn't anywhere else to go out there and really truly understand engineering from a modern perspective, right? From what it means today. And so for there's people out there looking for careers, trying to figure out what they're going to do. And I think this book kind of lays a really good foundation for anybody that says, I want to work in that middle space, right? I don't want to work on the back. I'm not sure I want to work in the front. I really want to work in the middle. And I think it sets a great foundation. Beyond that, it's not just about wanting to work in the middle. It's about wanting to understand how I integrate with the sides. And so what I really love about the book is it creates accountabilities, right? It says, here's a life cycle. Here are, and you can argue about the big pieces or the small pieces, but for the most part, everybody can look at that life cycle and recognize it, right? And I think it's a great model that we can all use. Here's a life cycle, and here are the responsibilities for each of the pieces of the life cycle. And if everybody takes care of their responsibilities, guess what? This flows really well. And if something fails along the way, here are the impacts on the world. So for a data engineer or for the non-engineers that are reading the book, they start to really understand the impact of the dominoes, so to speak, if somebody fails to do their part. So I love the fact that it kind of lays out a foundation for accountability. The last piece that I would say is that, and I think Andy mentioned this, I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit early in one of our earlier sessions, you talked about you do a great job talking about the historical elements, right? So it's not just here's where we are today. Especially early in the book, you talk about where these things came from and how these things came to bear, how these things came to become popular. And I think that's really useful. That'll make this book even more useful in 10 years because it's a good, provides good historical context for how we got here. And then maybe there's a data engineering 2.0 book that gets written in 2030 that talks about what's going to happen over the next 10 years. But that's what I took away. I think I was really enjoyed the book that you really enjoyed.
Well, thank you very
Andy,
much.
what were your takeaways?
So I think on the second edition, clearly we can do a better job of the security and privacy section. That would be the first thing. I think we could cover off things like GDPR, privacy, data ownership. We could talk about attribute-based access control versus role-based. You know, there's a lot of things we could unpack there, and make that a little more interesting. But overall, I agree. I like why we got to where we got to, right? Because if I look at the modern data stack today, I kind of think that's not where we should be. And we are where we are because of what came before. And so, you know, that's why I kind of echo Adrian's comments on that. The thing that I guess, and I echo many of Adrian's sentiments, one of the things that I think is interesting and useful is because there is now a life cycle, there's like a left to right thing. We can understand when we have a central data team that when they are asked to do something, there is a reason why it takes them hours, weeks, days, months, whatever it may be, because they actually have to do a sequence of activities, and those activities require them to, you know, talk to different stakeholders and access systems and actually do work and then come out with some sort of kind of outcome. And the more requests that we put into that central data team to get data from kind of left to right with some added kind of insight, clearly the slower things get, right? There's only ever a finite number of data engineers in an organization. But having that kind of articulated in a relatively simple model, right, kind of demonstrates, well, this is what data engineers actually do. And I think that's quite useful, you know, when you have someone in marketing or someone in finance or whatever, sort of say, well, you know, why is it taking a week to get this? Well, right. This is what we've been doing, because otherwise it's quite kind of opaque, right? You should be able to get this easily. That's what Shadow IT does, right? They just go and build stuff and it all works, forgetting that they haven't done any integration, and who knows if those numbers are correct. So yeah, I actually quite enjoyed reading this book in its kind of entirety. I'm not entirely sure about streaming as the future, and I'll just come back to that for a moment. I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion, I feel like streaming may have had its day, and I'm interested to know what's next. We've had the Kafka and the different variants for 5 years now, maybe 10 years. And I've not really seen wide-scale adoption. And so is that because is it because it's too hard? Is it because, people don't understand it? Is there some other reason? I don't know the answers to these questions. I'm just posing them rhetorically. So I do think there's something that will come along, and maybe the generative AI is kind of a step in this direction, it feels like we're on the edge of radically changing things and having not the modern data stack, the kind of post-modern data stack or whatever that may be. But who knows what that actually looks like?
Yeah, I think it's TBD. You can kind of see where the trends are going. Then all of a sudden, something like ChatGPT comes out and just changes a lot of stuff. And also Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and so forth, right? For images and everything else. That's the thing I've actually been thinking a lot about too. Is I feel like there's going to be an intersection. Right now, we live very much in a structured and semi-structured data world, right? But I feel like the combination of unstructured data is maybe the big mega trend that I didn't include in the book, but I think that's the dark horse that I think really could change a lot of things, right? So text, images, video, audio, all this stuff. Now, also being included in your data stack, that changes a lot of things.
Yes.
So I know that's even where Bill Inman. He forgot about data warehousing decades ago. He's been focused on text, right? And then I talked to my friends, Coactive AI, and they're working on images and video, which is scales of data sizes that are much larger. So it's I think that's kind of where things are going, and I didn't include it in the book, but that's absolutely fair game right now. And generative AI just blew the door open on that. That wasn't expected, but that's what happened. So
interesting.
Yeah,
interesting. That's something that I hadn't considered. Sorry, no, Adrian.
No, I was looking at some of Bill's stuff that he's been doing now on that unstructured data side, and it's really interesting. I'm like, man, this guy kid's coming up with new ideas, and so I'm excited to see. What's the name? What's the name of the company? Is it? I can't remember.
Forest Rim.
We'll put
Forest Rim.
Forest Rim.
Yeah.
Thank you, Forest Rim. Yeah. So there you go, Bill. You get a shout out for Forest Rim.
What was interesting actually is I did a test with ChatGPT and Bard, and I actually put in who is Bill Inman, and then I sent him the results. I was like, so are these right? And they're woefully incorrect. But I thought that was pretty
if it didn't start out with El Paso, Texas native, then it's incorrect. It's incorrect.
Right. Yeah. He was definitely floored. So I was like, you should write a blog post about this. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting because he's famous enough to have a Wikipedia page, and so I figured let's see what the results are, right, and have him verify it, and it came back absolutely incorrect. Actually, it was very convincing, but it was wrong. So
that's the way that we often describe Andy. Very convincing, but he's wrong.
I think you find it's the other way around. I think you're always right, but not very convincing. No one believes me.
Hey, look, I'm gonna respect Joe's time because I know he's probably got something else to run to. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime,
Andy and I
guys.
spent a lot of time. Thank you.
Well,
Cheers.
very
Have a
much.
good evening.
Thanks for reading the book. Thanks for the club. So we'll talk to y'all soon.
We're your fan base. That's what we are. We're your fan base.
Awesome.
Cheers.
All right, much appreciated.